good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be watching us from today. My name is Nontsegele Lonzula, and I'd like to welcome you to our launch of the Barometer Report. Today is an exceptional day. It is not just a day where we are looking at a report, but it is a moment for us to take time to reflect on what we found. So we are from CVO Institute, and the Barometer Report, specifically focusing on Botswana, is a product of the African Citizens Watch, which is an initiative under the Center of Civic Engagement at CVO Institute. So today, as we launch the Barometer Report, we want to look at what data is telling us about what is happening in Botswana. There was a turn of tides from 2024 to 2025 where the government changed the ruling party. So what has that looked like over the last year? That's what we're going to be reflecting on. And joining us today will be the executive director, the country researcher who took an integral role in putting this report together, our programs manager, and the rest of our team. So as we move forward today, I want you to think about what are we finding from the data that it has given us? What opportunities arise? What are places of concern? And how well has government done? And what should we be looking forward to? As I said, my name is Nontsegele Lonzula. Welcome and thank you for taking time to join us this morning. At this point, I would like to just highlight maybe 5 things that the report focuses on. It's looking at government's performance in 5 areas, which is economy, governance, social services, corruption, and climate change. I'm excited by this report. I look forward to hearing the findings with you. And at this point, I would like to hand over to the Executive Director of CVO Institute, who is Dr. Marisa, and he will give us an overview of what exactly is the African Citizens Watch, what role does CVO Institute play in this, and what is the big picture. Dr. Marisa, I would like to hand over to you.
So good morning, Nancy. Oh, good afternoon, Nancy. I'm clearly not Dr. Marisa, but he was just having a bit of a technical issue in logging in. So I'm just going to step in until we have him in the room. So good afternoon to everyone who's joining us. For those, yes, definitely in this part of the continent, it's definitely good afternoon. But if you're joining us from another region or place, it still could be good morning or good evening if, you're in the parts of the continent or parts of the world where it's already evening time. My name is Eda Joa. I'm the programs manager at CVO Institute. And I would just, on behalf of the team, just welcome everybody who has joined us in this really exciting period in time for us, where we are launching our first barometer report for Botswana, which looks at the performance of the government of Botswana after their first year in office. There's a whole team of us, including our country researcher, Mokaloba Makoloba, who will take us through the report. And there will also be a time for conversation and discussions, just to get people's insights and thoughts around the report. And it will officially go live at the end of this meeting. You'll then be able to access the report and continue to share just your thoughts and insights around the report and what the findings have been. But my role at this moment is just to give a brief background and context into this work. Botswana is one of 5 countries that we're tracking in the Southern African Development Community under our African Citizens Watch initiative. This initiative has been running since 2018. And just a brief background about us as CVO Institute. So CVO Institute is a regional think tank established in 2018. And really at the core and at the forefront of our work is to contribute towards a more inclusive society where citizen voices, citizen contributions, insights are really at the center of driving improved development and democracy across our continent. We have 3 centers of work, which is our Center for Civic Engagement, where this work and this initiative that we're discussing and launching today is housed. We also have a Center for Philanthropy and Communities, and then a Center for Economic Development and Livelihoods. So since our establishment in 2018, we have been embarking and engaging in this work around tracking the performance of governments. We started off initially just in Zimbabwe and then expanded into Malawi and Zambia. And in 2024, we expanded into South Africa and Botswana following the elections in those two countries. And at the core of the work that we do at African Citizens Watch is really centered around trying to answer a question around what happens the day after elections when people have voted, when the dust has settled and a new government or the incumbent government is ushered back into office. What happens thereafter? And how can the qualities of our democracies be improved? We are in a moment and a place where democracy has been reduced to just a one-day event centered around elections and the holding of free and fair elections. Political parties go on the campaign trail, they develop manifestos, they have rallies, people vote, and thereafter, it's like citizens retreat back from the public space and governments take over. But we definitely know that there is a challenge around that. What happens then to citizen voices, to their inputs and insights? And how then are we able to also keep track and monitor how well governments are doing based on promises made in the run-up to elections for those that then take up office, but also other major policy pronouncements that they may make during their time in office. So really at this core and center of this work is, trying to put forward and encourage discussions, engagement post-elections between governments and citizens, and then also to enhance aspects around accountability. How then are governments also putting forward and sharing information and insights around what are the achievements that they have made, around what it is that they've been able to push forward, where are the struggles and challenges, but how they've been able to work together with citizens to improve the delivery on public goods. The work that we do starts by analyzing manifestos, and we use manifestos really as a starting point to analyze their performance, because these are documents that are drawn up by political parties, again, who subsequently take up office and if they win elections and form governments. It is, I think it's something that's slightly different from other compacts that we see. We've got Agenda 2063. We've got the Sustainable Development Goals, which many of our governments sign up to. But those are external, oftentimes, the discussions around that is these are things that are external facing, the external developed, by external actors. But for us, manifestos are really important because for us as a starting place to track government performance and to try and enhance accountability by governments, because of the fact that they are drawn up. It is a document that they own, they have developed, and it's commitments that political parties are making to citizens to encourage them to vote for them. Another long-term vision with this work is to really also begin to kind of think about how manifestos are developed, but also how citizens vote and what influences their decision-making when they vote. Manifestos are often long drawn-up documents. In Zimbabwe, in our last election, in our elections in 2018, ZANU-PF produced a manifesto that was over 250 pages long. And, the opposition party had a manifesto that was close to 400 pages. These are just long documents that really the ordinary citizen is not able to go through. We are encouraged by the Umbrella for Democratic Change. Their long manifesto was 92 pages, and they did a 2-page summary as well. of their manifesto. Is 92 pages as well still too long? How then are citizens making informed decisions around who they vote for? Are they based really on personalities and who has the loudest voice and the biggest campaign rally? Or is it based on what ideas are being put forward? And also in the instances where it's incumbents seeking re-election, that they've performed well enough to, be put back into office. So this work, it's long-term work. Botswana, this is the first year that we're tracking the current, the umbrella for democratic change. And President Bako have 4 more years in office. So this work will continue over the 4 years. This is the first report that we'll be doing, but over the as we continue with this work, please, know that every year this is something that will now become a standing feature. We'll produce an annual progress report and then, which culminates in the final report towards the next round of elections that will look at their overall performance over the next 5 years. So I'll hand back to Nancy to just then kind of take us through to the next stages of today's launch. And to help just guide us through our proceedings. Back to you, Nancy.
All right, thank you, Eda, for that context. With that direction, I'd like to hand over to Mokaloba, who is our country researcher who's based in Botswana, who was the forefront person in writing in this report and targeting what is happening in Botswana. So Mokaloba, if you're ready, I will hand over to you to just take us through. We are keen to hear about what is happening in Botswana.
All right, thank you very much, Nancy. Good afternoon, everyone. Like as already been said, my name is Mokaloba. I'm the Botswana country researcher for Sevio, and today we're here to look precisely at the UDC or the Botswana government's performance over the past 12 months. And to go through that report, I'll just start with a briefing of exactly what I'm going to do and then hand it over to Eda to just give you our methodology as to exactly how do we get to our findings. So with that being said, allow me to say thank you to all of you for taking time out of your hectic schedules to be with us. And let's hope you'll get here with a better view of what's happening in our country and in Botswana if you're not a citizen of this country. Yes, so this is how my presentation is outlined. Obviously, as much as we started tracking Botswana last year, we cannot ignore that as a country we come from somewhere. So hence my presentation will start with a brief historic transition from the time of our independence, and then, like I said, I'll hand over to Eda to just give you a briefing into methodology, because research reports like this, barometer reports like this, the bigger questions always comes around the methodology as to people always question how exactly did you come to those particular conclusions, especially that we even include figures. And then I will get back now and look deeper into the government performance of Botswana. Like I was mentioned earlier, this tracking project have categorized government performance into 5 sectors, being the economy, social services, governance, corruption, and climate change. So at a sectorial analysis level, that's where I'll take you through those particular sectors and paint a picture of exactly in the past 12 months what has been happening with regard to the umbrella for democratic change and the Botswana government, with specific reference, like we always say, to our manifesto. Let it be known that as we present this, these are not something that we borrowed from elsewhere. This barometer report is based primarily on what the Umbrella for Democratic Change produced at its manifesto. Eda mentioned that they had a 92-page manifesto, very rich, and from that we extracted a number of promises that we grouped into those 5 sectors. So I will then look into those, and then towards the end we'll just from the first year look at what have we learned, and going ahead what can you expect from us as Sevio going forward as far as this tracking process is concerned. And then let's start with the historic transition before I head to the historic transition before I head to the methodology part. As a Botswana and probably almost everyone in the academia and the media, citizens, everyone, Botswana have in most cases been presented as a beacon of democracy. But one thing that happened in 2024, which was historic, was the change of government. Ever since 1966, when we gained our independence, all our elections were won by the Botswana Democratic Party. So from the first elections in 1965 until the last elections in 2019, it was always the BDP dominating. But then in 2024, something happened. When we went to elections October 29, 2024, something that even pundits, many people couldn't predict. The umbrella for democratic change emerged victorious. And then by the start of November, President Advocate Duma Boko was inaugurated as the President of the Republic of Botswana. And then in the same breath, in a more economic sense, recall that throughout the leadership of the Botswana Democratic Party, Botswana has been a very diamond-reliant economy. We always sugarcoat it and say mineral-based economy, but if you look deeper into it, you realize that it's largely diamond-based. Recall at independence, Botswana was one of the poorest. And then until we started mining diamonds, that's when Botswana's economy boomed to an extent where it was categorized as an upper middle class economy. So that's just the historic transition as far as politics is concerned, as well as probably the economic transition of this country is concerned. So bear in mind as we go a little bit further that diamonds will always be a key part of this. And then there's a historic transition of change of government from the Botswana Democratic Party into the umbrella for democratic change will be a core of our discussion. I think I'll hand over to Eda now to just quickly go through the methodology before I dwell into the depths of our findings over the 1 year period that we've been tracking in the Botswana government.
Great, thanks, Mokoloba. So I'll run through the methodology, and please do note that we do spend a part in the report where we discuss this. So if there are things that you miss, feel free to ask questions. We can always respond to it. But when you read the report, you can then take your time to just read deeper and just understand the methodology that's used. And this is the methodology that we use across all the 5 countries that we track. So as highlighted, the promises came from the Umbrella for Democratic Change's election manifesto, where we extracted 125 promises. They've been categorized into 5 key sectors: economy, governance, corruption, climate change, and social services. In as much as we're tracking we're looking at the promises, we also have to understand where do the actions come from. Apologies, I see that there's a typo there. It should read, where do the actions come from? So with the tracker, the promises are there, but we look then to find actions from official publications. So this could be government ministry reports from agencies. We also use trusted media outlets. On the screen, you'll see the current media outlets that we use, so both online, mostly online, because with each promise, when we highlight and put that this is a verifiable action, we then put a link to where that action was drawn from so that there is evidence. We also use trusted or use international organizations or media outlets. So if others like Reuters, for example, report on it. But the main thing is that we make sure that at least 2 or 3 other or different entities are reporting on the same thing in terms of whether something is an action. It's only verifiable and documented actions that we record. If an action isn't published, it's excluded from our tracker. As I said, all the reported actions are triangulated. We fact-check them amongst multiple sources before we record it on Botswana Citizens Watch as a tangible action for a particular promise. Next slide, please. Then for the methodology, because ultimately as Mokaloba goes through it, you'll see that there'll be an overall score percentage that the government will get, and each sector as well will have an overall score. But how do we calculate that score? When we look at it, we look at each action, it's assessed using a standardized scoring each promise is assessed using a standardized scoring framework. So we have implemented, in progress, broken, or not commenced. When something is implemented, it's a promise that has been fully delivered. In progress means that there has been some action or activities that have taken place around it, but it's not yet been brought to full completion. Broken is instances where government might say one thing, but the actions result in something different. And in that case, we call those broken promises. They're not commenced, there's no action, or an opposite action has taken place. So each action is then scored, and the maximum possible score for an action is 14. We're looking at certain things with that action. Is it a new strategy? Is it a policy reform incentive, or is it a disenabler? Has a new law been established? Does it fit within an existing legal framework? Does it have budget implications? Has money actually been allocated and resourced, for that action to be implemented? Does the time frame, does it fit within the current annual planning cycle? Is there cross collaboration between a ministry or agency that has been established? So the sectorial scores then are calculated by averaging the scores of all the promises within each sector. So as I said, there's a promise, there are actions that are taken. The actions are all scored to give a score for the promise, and then all the promises in that sector, whether it be economy, social services, governance, climate change, or corruption, are then aggregated together and given an overall score. Then the overall government score is then derived from the aggregation of all the sectoral averages. But as I said, this is the first time we're presenting it. It is quite a process. So if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but the methodology is broken down further and highlighted in the report to give you more time to read through it. But one of the particular things that, help us in this process is using the SMART assessment as part of our methodology. The specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. For us, only if actions are specific and measurable are they recorded on the tracker. So each action must have the relevant infrastructure to be implemented within the current planning schedule. And ultimately, SMART promises become easier to assess and monitor. So, as you go through the tracker and you look through some of the promises that have been drawn out, the 171 promises, in some instances, you can see that there is some promises that are particularly vague, and we try as best as possible to ensure that, how then can we take the various actions and, to then say that there's been tangible movement across this promise. But when promises are SMART, in instances, for example, if they say that government will deliver on or build 100 houses by 2025, that becomes quite specific. It's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So those are then much easier promises to track and to collect actions, tangible actions around. So I'll just stop here now in terms of the methodology and hand back to you, Mokaloba, to then take us through the findings of what the government of Botswana has achieved so far.
All right, thank you, Eda. Now, allow me to now dwell into the gist of our report, which is how has the government of Botswana performed over the past 12 months. And like it's been mentioned in the methodology, out of the Umbrella for Democratic Change manifesto leading into the 2024 October general elections, we extracted about 171 promises. And out of those 171 promises, as of end of November, when the UDC government clocked a year in office, we had about 23 promises that were in progress. I want you, as I say this, I want you to also reflect on what was said and the methodology, that we can have a promise that is fully implemented, we can have a promise that is in progress, or we can have a promise that is broken. So where we are now, 171 promises that we extracted, only 23 are in progress. That means we don't have a promise that has been broken thus far, and we don't have a promise that we have recorded or noted as having been fully implemented. So now let's now dive deeper into this to unpack how did we get to this 13%. On overall, out of those 23 promises that are in progress, our barometer score for the government of Botswana, or for the UDC government, ever since it took power for the past 12 months, it's 13%. I'm sure you could have seen that in the news sometimes earlier last week, to say severe rates the UDC government as having achieved or fulfilled 13% of their promises. So now let's dive deeper into how did we get to those 13 promises at a more deeper level. Yes, like we said, we categorize these promises into five major categories. And the first category is social services. And like we said earlier, Botswana is not only the country that we are tracking, but here is something unique about the Botswana government or the UDC manifesto. Out of those 5 areas that we categorize promise into, Botswana is leading as far as social services is concerned. Out of 171 promises, 62 of those promises actually fall under social services. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, it largely has to do maybe with the BNF factor, or the UDC factor generally identifying itself as a more of a socialist party. Socialist party in history will always tell you that most of their policies are usually aligned towards social protection. Hence, it's not surprising that a staggering 36% of the 171 promises are actually under social service. And out of the 62 promises that fall under this particular sector, only 6 are in progress. 56 are noted as not having commenced, and then we have 0 that don't have any that have been modified, broken, or any that have been fully implemented. And at much more of a subsector overview of the social services, we also subdivided them into land and housing, which had 5 promises, and currently only 2 actions are actually in progress. And then out of levies and rates, only 1 action. In the health sector, which I'm sure a lot of you would actually be interested in, especially because of the situation that we found our health sector in currently, we only have 1 action that is currently in process, which translates to about 11% out of the 8. And then education as well, I'm sure a lot of you on the ground will also agree to me that one area that has been talk of town in this particular country. We only have 1 action out of 9 promises that we related to education from the UDC manifesto. And then in youth, sports and culture, 12 promises, only 1 is actually actionable at the moment. And then with regard to pension, we also have 1 action which is actually in progress. Hence, it translates to 50%, not 100%. Had that been fully implemented, that would have translated to 100% progress. And then we have quite a number of areas as far as social services are concerned that are not commenced: land allocation, emergency and disaster management, electricity. There are many others. So that's just a general sectoral overview as far as social services are concerned. So now let's look now deeper into this social service, to see exactly, maybe when we talk about areas that have been actionable, where do we point, or where do we find this particular actions. I'm sure you'd agree with me. Talk of the town is about pension increase. Remember, prior to the elections, there was this campaign language, which actually was even in the manifesto, where the UDC promised to increase old age pension from the then 840 under the BDP government to 1,800. This is what we popularly know here as Standabal. And that was very key. And in almost every rally, they wouldn't even have a rally that would end without mention of this particular promise. And it was part of that which we categorized under social service, precisely under the pension increase act. And after assuming to power, the UDC, citing physical challenges or financial challenges, only increased old age pension to 1,400 rather than the promised 1,800. This is why this promise is captured as in progress. Had it been implemented in such a way that it was old age pension was increased to 1,800, would have captured this as fully implemented. Hence, it's captured as in progress. If within this period leading to 2019, this pension is increased to 1,800, you go to your tracker, you obviously would find out we have now upgraded that to fully implemented. Another social service that have been talk of town is the Bonno housing scheme, led by Minister Ramogapi. Remember, in one of the key issues in the UDC manifesto was that they promised to build over 100,000 housing units, and they actually launched this scheme called the Bonno housing scheme. You'd recall in Parliament, after it was launched, there was an update by the minister to say they've so far built 34,567 houses to be precise. So that's one that we note, and we'll keep watch on it. It's one action that we have noted, that okay, they launched the bonus scheme. They're saying there's a progress in building those houses, but we'll keep track on it to ultimately gauge it against the target that they set in their own manifesto. The other area that has to do with social services has to do with the sanitary pads program. If you recall, the president launched a project of about valued at about 69 million. And if you recall, Eda talked about promises that actually even have financial obligations, or where money have actually been issued out. About 69 million, at least according to the government of Botswana, was issued for provision of free sanitary pads to secondary, or let me just say school-going girls nationwide. So that's another one that we noted as in progress. And then if at all it gets fully implemented, we'll come again and say, no, this was a promise. Despite funds being allocated to this particular project, it has now been fully implemented. And then still under social services, I want to highlight, like I said, because health is a key sector of this particular area. You would recall that for the past 24 months or thereabout, talk of the town around has been the health sector. Shortage of medicines. We have been in instances where critical medicines, including ARVs, high blood pressure medication, and many others, actually we have run short, where the president actually in his SONA address came out and said supply of medicines in Botswana remains at a critical 36%, rather than our target of about 95%. So that shows, or that paints a picture of a health system of a country that is in tatters, for lack of a better word. But then as we track this particular promise, and why we are tracking it, because even in the UDC manifesto, they talk a lot about health, about 8 promises or so that directly speaks to the health. One of them being the creation of a national health insurance schemes, which its main target will make sure that every Botswana has access to quality health care. So where we are right now, 1 year later, this seems like it's one of the key challenges. And to emphasize how much of a challenge it is, last year, towards the end of last year in August, the president actually declared a state of medical emergency that lasted 21 days. The key target being to actually improve the supply and distribution of medications in our healthcare system. So that's one area that we're still looking at, and as we continue tracking, as an area that we continue precisely to look into. And at any given point, if there are developments in this particular regard, we'll always note them. That's why it's always key to always check our tracker, check our social media apps to see exactly if we have anything with regard to this particular crisis. So this is one area under social services that I had noted, or that we had noted, as something that is worth looking much closer into, especially that even Botswana back home is actually feeling this and expecting that change that was promised to them under the UDC manifesto. And then if we as we move forward to another sector, the economy. Obviously, this is, many would argue, one of the most important sectors, and to show its importance and relevance, it was rated in the number of promises is the second one after social services. And our rating of the UDC performance in the first year with regards to the sector is at 9%. And let's look a bit deeper into this. And remember, the title of our report is Settling Amid Fiscal Challenges. Hence, the economy will be critical, or will be key when we talk about this particular area. And then out of the 57 promises that we drafted from this particular sub area, only 10 are in progress, meaning 47 as of now have not commenced. 0 have been modified, 0 have been broken, and 0 have been fully implemented. And the subsector overview of this particular economy area is that one of the key issues that people will be keen to know about will be employment. As far as employment is concerned, from the UDC manifesto, you can draw about 6 promises that speaks directly to employment, and this is key, looking at the unemployment levels of Botswana currently. And out of those 6, only 1 is actually in progress. And with regard to transport, there are about 6 promises, and they include, you might even know, they include things like transport infrastructure, airports, Botswana Railways, and others. But out of those 6 promises, as far as transport is concerned, unfortunately, there's been no movement in any of them. And the industry factor, as we look to diversify as a country, 9 promises, and so far we have only 3, which translates to 17% in progress. And then agriculture, the base of food security and food self-sufficiency, we had about 19 promises, and only 2 are actionable at the moment. And then with as far as the budget allocation is concerned, the UDC last month presented its second budget, and it's only obvious that we had looked into both those budgets and tried to actually, in relation to their manifesto, try to find out exactly, as far as their budget promises are concerned, what they have done and what have they not done. So as far as the 11 promises under budget allocation are concerned, we have 3 that are actually in progress right now, which translates to 17%. And then as far as project management is concerned, government in its developmental budget, at any given point, it's involved in a number of projects, and obviously the UDC spoke to a number of them. What they touch base on one of them in a much more deeper dive after this. We had 6 promises, and as of now, only 1 is actually in progress, which translates to 11%. So now, allow me to now dwell much more into the economy to look at areas where probably we have seen movement or we have seen action. You would notice that true to its manifesto, the UDC actually created a sovereign wealth fund. The sovereign wealth fund actually was initially funded to the tune of 76 million pula, which actually it was part of their manifesto, to say when they actually, their promise was that when they actually attain state power, they will initiate and build a sovereign wealth fund to allow for regional and international investment. So actually that is actually now taken over. It was announced in the minister and vice president first budget speech that they have reserved 76 million to be invested into this particular work fund. And then the second one is with regard to progressive taxation, which is kind of debatable in a way. In economic terms, when you talk about progressive taxation, we talk about taxing the richer more and taxing the poorer less. And this is was one of the key manifesto promises of the UDC. And true to that, they've actually initiated tax increases to the rich. We might actually debate on whether those that form of taxation is progressive, but at least as far as economic definitions, that actually translates to progressive taxation. They've actually, in the 2025 budget speech, announced a 1.5% increase from 22 to 23.5% of all corporate tax, and then personal income tax for high earners was also increased to 25%. So that in itself equates to progressive taxation, which is a key part of the UDC manifesto. And then the other part is with regard to project management, which I spoke to earlier. The BDP government, prior to losing state power, there was a number of projects that were launched across the country that to be implemented along something called development manager model. They cut across many sectors. And in one of the UDC manifesto, they had promised that they would actually ensure that there is early cancellation of projects that are deemed to be too expensive or not cost effective for government. And true to that, they've since cancelled over 90%, which is about 140 out of the 148 developmental projects that were initiated by the BDP under the developmental management model. About only 16 are actually ongoing, translating to over 148 that have been cancelled, which is something that we noted as an action that is in progress as far as project management reform is concerned. And then still under the economy, if you look into this, our economy, you cannot speak about it without speaking about uncertainty. As far as diamond is concerned, like I said earlier, our economy for the longest of time has been so reliant on diamonds, and unfortunately, one of the key issues that have been doing rounds is our diamond deal with DBS. It started under the previous government, and it's ongoing. Unfortunately, this deal, despite the UDC actually coming out to say when they gain power, they will make sure that it's more transparent. Unfortunately, until today, this diamond deal remains uncertain, and the relationship between Botswana and DBS still remains rocky. And some people actually pointing to that as one of the reasons why our diamonds probably are not doing as good as they should be. So allow me now to also go to the next sector. Governance is another sector where we had about 43 promises, and only 3 are in progress. And the 3 that are in progress, I'm sure they are very, very popular promises that you would know of. One of the very first actions that the UDC government actually undertook after taking power was the burial of a certain Piteng Khaoborek. I'm sure you'd recall that it was during the International Human Rights Day. And even in their manifesto, they actually say they want to promote fairness and empower disadvantaged members of our society, including the San. I'm sure you'd agree with me that the San or Basara are actually one of those that for the longest of time have actually been sidelined. So the burial after almost 2 years of the Basara of that particular gentleman being in a mortuary was actually noted by us as one of those actions that speaks to empowering disadvantaged members of our community. And then still under corruption, you'd recall there was a high-class profile case, including the former permanent secretary. I think it's a case that has been settled before the courts by the Katamuru PC. You remember it actually caused a lot of confusion because it went back from the Court of Appeal back to the High Court. But in the UDC manifesto, they also commit to actually ensuring that there is fair trial of all those that are convicted of corruption. So we also noted that without interference from the executive or wherever, that actually translates to a promise under corruption. 6 promises under corruption, 3 are in progress and 3 have not commenced. and that translates to 22%. Allow me to rush quickly to climate change. It would not be unfair of Seville or anyone in the world that we live of to not mention climate change. Hence, it's one of those areas that we are tracking. Unfortunately, out of the UDC manifesto, climate change only had 3 promises out of 171. And out of those 3, only one is in progress. And the one that is in progress was actually a legislation that was passed by Parliament to kind of consolidating all the legislation that we used to have and actually trying to rectify it to meet the UN climate change and the CITES declaration. After climate change, we move to the just general overview of government performance. The 13% that we have, if you look at it sectorial, the economy is at 9%, government is still the lowest at 3%, corruption is at 22%, and social services we rated them 12%, whilst climate change at 17%. But remember, the 17% is largely because our climate change only had three promises out of 171 promises. Yes, and as I draw to a close, allow me maybe just to share briefly with you what we have learned as Seville and how we plan to move forward. This tracking process, important as it is, it has its number of challenges. The first one is access to information. You can recall from our methodology that we rely heavily on government official communication, we rely on state media, and unfortunately, you would agree with me, some of our government, even our government online sources, if you visit a ministerial website right now, you note that it hasn't been updated in the longest of time. So it becomes a challenge for us. And then the other lesson that we are learning from is actually launches versus action. I would want to cite one precise launch here. Remember around August last year, UDC had an action that spoke to restoring school sports. And the Minister of Sports actually held a launch in Lobatse Sports Complex, speaking to the launch or the relaunch of school sports. And actually, our newspapers were awash with headlines like "School Sports is back." So that becomes a challenge with us. But if you look at that today, 6 months later, nothing has happened as far as the restoration of school sports is concerned. So sometimes you get confused as between a launch and actually action. And then the other challenge that we also had is with regard to promise categorization. You find that some of the promises, they actually, as you look into the manifesto, they cut across sectors. You'd find that a promise, like say maybe the delivery of sanitary pads to secondary school age, it's both education and health related. And then as we move, like we said, this is just the first report. We'll be tracking for the next 4 years until 2029 with a comprehensive report to be released towards the 2029 general election. So this is where we are. The Botswana Citizens Watch and the African Citizens Watch in general are actually live on our website at any given point. You can always check them out to check the progress of our tracking system. So I think I'll hand back to Noinsi. I think that's it from my side.
Thank you, Mokaloba, for that, and Eda as well for the presentations that you've given. Just to recap on what was covered in this section, we spoke about the methodology. How did we get the data that we are presenting to you today? And then we also have spoken about what the results are telling us. What is the data telling us in those 5 areas that we spoke about, which were social services, economy, governance, as well as climate change and corruption. I think just to help people ask questions, could you just put back that slide that shows the overall picture of what we found in the different sectors, Rebecca, if you could help me with that. At this point, I'd like to invite you to ask questions around what we have presented so far today. We'd like to engage in a conversation with you. And I see there's one question that has come through from Letumusa Kulube. Thank you, Mokaloba, for this insightful presentation. While opposition movements lean on the frustrations of citizens during the campaign trail, once they're in government, the reality is that they must serve all and should do so within the guidelines of the Constitution and regulations that they campaigned outside of. We continue to watch how UDC performs for the remainder of their term. Thank you for that comment, Letumusa. If there are any other questions, please do write them in the chat box. I am keen to engage. It was quite interesting to me that social services has the highest number of promises that are given there, Mokaloba. And I like that you've put then three main areas that we're focusing on. And that was the pension, the housing, and sanitary, which I think is a very important thing. And then was followed by the economy with 51 promises there. So if there are no questions, I will take comments as well from the floor. If there's anyone who has any comments or questions, here's one. Sonia, thank you for your question. And she says, regarding access to information, does the methodology allow for direct inquiry to governments, departments, ministries regarding issues of interest and clarifications therein? I will throw that to either Mokaloba or Eda.
Eda, I think you can
Thanks.
take that since it speaks to the methodology.
Thanks, Nancy, for that. And thank you, Sonia, for the question. So what we do is base it on what's publicly available, information that's already there out in the public domain, that government presents in reports, in media briefings, and so forth, budget speeches, etc. It's not necessarily that we'll then follow up for direct inquiry, because given the nature, this is an online platform, and we want to be able to provide the information as it is available to the public. If there's then kind of need for certain clarity and so forth, which is why also when we present this information, it's publicly available information, it's on the website, we would still welcome engagement with government around it. But in terms of then the methodology and the data that we then use to say that this is a tangible action, it's what's publicly available, what's in the public domain. If government sends out further clarification, and again, it's publicly issued information and it's available somewhere on a website, or the news or a newspaper reports on it, then we can then modify something, but based on information that's out there in the public. If it's not there, then we can't use it as verification that this is a tangible action.
Great. Thank you, Eda, for that question. I saw a thumbs up from Sonia. She's answered. I would like to move on to the next question from Lebotse. Thank you, Mokolobo, for the insightful presentation. Given the current projection of the economic sector, is it early to presume our current regime will not perform well over its remaining years? Is it safe to presume that our current regime will not perform well over its remaining years? I think that one is directed to you, Mokolobo. Please come through. Okay, while we wait for Mokolobo to come back, there's another question. I'll go on to Matthew John, and he says, good day and thanks for the informative presentation. Mr. Mokaloba, what are the Botswana government's plan to enhance research capability in Botswana? Given the aspiration to transition to a knowledge-based economy, UB's enrollment of postgraduate students is at 10% or thereabout. What does it say about Botswana's commitment to research as a pillar of economic recovery and diversification? So far we have two questions. Mokaloba, I'm just checking if you're ready to come through and answer.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. Let me start with the one by Matthew on Botswana's government commitment to a knowledge-based economy. I think I would agree that it's been in our lips and the government lips for the longest of time. From the previous government into this government, including the UDC manifesto, that there is a will to transition to this knowledge-based economy, and research is supposed to be a driver of that. But as far as where we are right now, there is still very little. Under the UD's government, there's actually even a promise that speaks to actually the creation of a research innovation hub and ensuring that there is research funding. But unfortunately, as far as actions are concerned, there's still very little that we can talk about as far as investing in knowledge in research is concerned. So it's basically, we're still basically at a point where it's all talk, but as far as actions are concerned, Nonsi, there is very little. Nonsi, I think my network was a bit slow. Can you just remind me about the other question?
Sure. The first question said, let me just read it out for you again. Thank you, Mokaloba, for the insightful presentation. Given the current projection of the economic sector, is it early to presume our current regime will not perform well over its remaining years?
Thank you, Nancy. And thank you for that question. I don't want to run into the risk of being a fortune teller. All we are doing as CVO is tracking. We cannot really know what exactly the government is planning. What I can just say to that question is the good thing would be to continuously check our tracking progress, because anything that happens, we'll definitely update. But as to being a fortune teller, as to exactly where the government will go from here, your guess is as good as mine. Only thing that I have as data, and the only thing that we continue to provide as African Citizens Watch, as the Botswana Citizens Watch chapter, as data and actions as they happen for the next 4 years. So maybe we can have that, we will have a concrete answer to that at our launch just prior to the 2019 elections.
All right. Thank you, Mokaloba, for that. There's one last question from Sonia, and then I will move on to the next part of our program today. She says, lastly, are there any other dissemination events planned for the report after this launch for further reach and engagement, I mean?
Yes, definitely. And thank you for that question, Sonia. One thing that I can tell you is we are sitting on a lot, and unfortunately at times we have such a launch, and as much as incredibly there's a good number of people out here today, we still need to do more to get this one, this report out. Like it was said earlier, immediately after this report is going live, it will be there on all CVO platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter, and then obviously in our invitation here, I've seen a couple of media personality, and I'm sure I'll be engaging with them here. I've seen someone from Sunday Standard. I think I've also seen someone from Duma FM and Gaps FM. So those are some of the platforms that probably from here, after sharing the report with them, we'll probably engage throughout this week and next week on this particular report. But this report as well, it's not for us to keep. We're still disseminated to even all of you who are here to actually engage, and we'll also make it public.
Okay, great. I'm about to close this session on questions. I'm seeing there's a few that are there. I'm just going to read them out. I do think that Mukaloba has kind of spoken to this question as we move forward. This is Matthew John, and he says, do you think Botswana will achieve economic recovery anytime soon? And what would be the driving force towards that recovery? Is industrialization, a value addition, a possible path to recovery? Take an example of the Silibe Pique citrus project and the cannabis project. I think Mukaloba answered that a little bit to say, who is to say what will happen with the economy? But I will not take away the chance for Mukaloba to answer that question rather. There's Abigail Mahosi here who says, from your tracking, has the government delivered what they had promised to deliver within a year of assuming office? Abigail, I would like for you to take a look at this slide as we wait for a response that kind of gives you an idea of where we are. And then there is Lesilo who says, well done to Team CVO, and a special shout out to Botswana country researcher Mokaloba, building on Sonia's question in executing this report. Were key stakeholders consulted, for instance, civil society and UN agencies for synergy or information crucial to gauging Botswana's development progress. For instance, on corruption, I know there was an establishment of the CSO-led Transparency and Accountability Committee that sought to hold leaders accountable. As far as I'm concerned, this committee didn't see the light of the day, primarily due to tension between corruption agencies and CSO on implementation, drawing attention to tension between launch and implementation. There is Bilton rather. He says, an insightful presentation there, Mr. Mokoloba and team. I had noted one question during the presentation, mainly on the methodology. I noted that the institute rely mainly on what is shared by the same government we are tracking. I was wondering, what do we have on ground for cross-checking or confirmation? I crossed out the question as it was also noted under the lessons learned towards the presentation. Towards the end of the presentation. So those are all the questions that have come through. Mokaloba, I don't know if you or Eda, if you'd like to come through and answer some of the questions that I've read out.
Yes, thank you, Nosi. If I go first, I think beautiful questions from who are here, and the first one as to whether they've delivered in their first year. I think ours is to put out the data out here. We've even gone a further step of actually analyzing and putting figures to it. So it's up to you. After we share the report, this presentation, you can be the judge. We are not here to actually give a verdict as whether they're failing or passing. That's not necessarily our scope of work. And then the other one spoke to diversification. Actually, under the economy, if you go to our tracking site, we have actually noted in October 2025, Parliament actually passed the Cannabis Act, which now spoke to what we have known locally as, in Parliament, they always joke about it as Motokwane, or whatever they want to call it. It's one of those areas that it appears on the UDC manifesto as a way of diversifying the economy. But beside the act, nothing really concrete has been talked about. The Citrus project, like we said, we only speak to that which is in the manifesto. Remember, the Citrus project is coming from the previous government. So if you look into the UDC manifesto, you won't find anything that speaks to diversification through the Citrus route. So we won't have a comment on that. I think the other questions with regards to methodology, the other ones, I think we compliments, we take that, and whatever, we always keep looking to better ourselves as far as this tracking process is concerned.
All right. Thank you, Mokaloba, for that. At this point, I would like to invite the Executive Director of Seaview Institute to just come in and give a couple of remarks. And as we move forward from that, we are going to talk about the implications of this report and our findings to policymakers, those who are in the civic space, and to the ordinary citizen. What does this report mean, and what is the way forward? Dr. Marisa, I'd like to hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Mokaloba, you denied people a chance to see you. You remain a myth. Then I think there was something you spoke about housing that was interesting. You started counting. You said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Does that mean they only built 6 or 7 houses? Then I was also fascinated with the discussion around sanitary pads. I think okay, you guys are responsible for tracking, and it's okay, but we also need to find ways of saying, how do we make sure that we go beyond tracking, but we begin to offer policy alternatives. In another work that we do, we support a social enterprise based here in Zimbabwe that does reusable pads. Pad poverty is a big problem across Southern Africa. So beyond just saying we need to go to a supermarket and buy pads, we need to think about how we can sort of reduce those costs, because it's something, it's used, it's no longer useful, you flush it away, you throw it away. So it's something that we need to be thinking about. Those are just small remarks that I saw from your report, but just to connect the dots, because it's very important for us to do that. What are we learning? We sit here, we're tracking in 5 countries. I think the first thing that we're learning is half the time when a transition like the one in Botswana happened, the one in Malawi and Zambia, the first thing that the new guys who come into power, they say, the coffers are empty. there's very little money for them to push on those promises they made in the manifesto. So we realize that many manifestos, especially coming from the opposition, that then becomes a ruling party, are unhinged. They are not based on reality around how much money does the government actually have. So that's very important. Then there's this issue around, and this is cutting across all the countries that we're looking at. Then the second one is around autonomy. How much scope, how much space do our governments have to actually push through on those ideas they've put in their manifestos? Because we begin to realize that despite the constitutional provisions of sovereignty, governments face many limitations. The first one being budgets. Financial resources are not a finite source, they are infinite. And now you have to be juggling across different competing interests. So we find that many governments struggle with that. But also, thirdly, the issue around common themes. We're seeing that in Southern Africa, when you're looking at countries that are struggling, the biggest problem that we're beginning to face is there's a competition, though, is around health provision and employment. And yet, if you look at many of our countries, very few have got employment creation strategies. We've left this to say investors will come and create jobs for us. Yet it's a problem that cuts across the entire sub-region. Then the issue around public health. Mokaloba's examples about shortages of drugs, etc., etc. To begin to look at, is there not only a Botswana drug strategy, but a sub-regional drug strategy to say, what would that mean if countries came together and said, we're now doing our own big drug manufacturing entity that services the region? Because the embarrassment is that we don't run short of very specialized drugs. We run short of very easy to secure drugs. Yeah, drugs whose intellectual property expired long back. You can now just replicate them. We run short of painkillers. We run short of generic blood pressure meds, etc., etc. But to begin to say, what are we seeing and how are we connecting with issues? So I think it's very important for us to have done this. And also for us, Botswana is significant in the fact that I think Botswana had a single party for 58 years. So this change, what does that mean? Does it mean the extension of democracy? Does it mean, because we're trying to understand why did the Botswana vote out the government that was in power and bring in this? And is this government, like the other participant asked, is this government contributing towards meeting the needs of Botswana? Does it understand what were those aspirations and challenges? For us, this is an important work as I conclude. What we're trying to do is to really foster government to people conversations, but to really foster accountability. And like Eda said in your opening remarks, the accountability that we're looking for is not around things that our governments are being asked to come and sign either in Addis Ababa or in New York at the UN or in at the AU, but compacts that they establish on their own and promises they make to their citizens. So we're thinking that this is the first layer, first tier of ensuring accountability. And this work goes on, it continues. This is just a first year of this government. So we don't want to sound like we're being harsh on them, but we totally understand that there's a couple of years to go. We'll be tracking, building upon what we've done in this report. Every year, there'll be a report like this that we then present either in person, in Gaborone, or through technology. But thanks again for those who made it. Back to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Dr. Marisa, for those remarks. We are still tracking. Our work is not yet done. We still have a couple of more years to go. Now, at this point, we'll move on to the next part of our program where we are looking at the implications of this report, as I said, to policymakers, to the civil society, as well as to citizens. And I'll hand over to Eda and Mokaloba to just take us on with that.
Thanks, Nancy. I won't belabor the point because I think a lot of it Dr. Marisa has covered, but I think just the emphasis from some of the remarks I made at the beginning that it really is about how we can improve the quality of the democratic space across the different countries that we're tracking, and how we can support the accountability movement. The report is publicly available, so governments themselves can use it as a measuring stick or a yardstick to see how others, we're non-partisan. We're basing this all on data that we collect. For citizens, it's an easy way to, again, have a sense of where governments are making progress, where there's still challenges, what kind of conversations then to have with office holders about what can be done better. The same for civil society organization, especially, as I said, those who are part of the accountability movement. But basically, it's really about building a greater movement around accountability, openness, and transparency around how governments operate. But to then think about how democracy should not just be framed around free and fair elections, but that the true work really starts after elections, and how governments, citizens work together to improve quality of life, economy, social service delivery in the countries.
Eda, thank you for your remarks. And this then marks the end of our program today. But if you'd like to engage more with our work, we are available on www.cvoinstitute.org. And we're also there on various social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook at CVO Institute. You can find us on LinkedIn, and you can find us on CVO TV. We have a podcast where we discuss some of these issues. If you're keen to know more about what is happening with the African Citizens Watch, we did a whole series on the different countries that we are tracking. Thank you so much for your time and for engaging us and for your patience as well. We hope to see you again soon in our next engagement, but enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you to the team. Thank you, Dr. Marisa, for joining us, and to all our delegates that we had today. Have a good day.